Planned Pinardhood hit an unplanned speed bump as Goffstown Planning Board Chairman John Heichel, a member of the ad hoc committee overseeing the development of the area's master plan, secured that board's unanimous support on a motion that effectively removed the existing residential areas from the planning effort. Heichel said his motion was designed to refocus the effort on the development of the commercial industrial corridor along Mast Road and avoid certain defeat at the polls in March, when town voters will have the final say. Reiterating what he said in interviews here on Girard at Large, Heichel said the narrower focus was the only thing he'd consider supporting, noting that was supposed to be the original focus of the planning effort, which he said had wandered far off that original mission. Heichel's motion seemed to mollify neighborhood opponents of the plan, who've hammered the ad hoc committee and the town selectmen with their concerns. They would rather the whole plan simply be stopped and the grant paid back. That's not going to happen. The committee's work is far from done. However, as the community plan part of this effort goes to the planning board on September 12th, the so-called SMART Code, which governs zoning and building regulations, will be workshopped by the ad hoc committee over a yet-to-be-determined schedule of meetings, which is likely to start after they've finished the community plan. Their next meeting is at Town Hall on the 20th. Mark it in your calendar. They're taking public comment. Meanwhile, ad hoc committee member Tony Martz, who vocally supported Heichel's move last night, sent a letter to more than 100 people yesterday defending his motives and participation on the planned Pinardhood ad hoc committee. By the way, that term really ticks him off. Questions have been raised by several in the town regarding Martz's participation on the committee, given his past significant involvement in development projects and the potential windfall he might experience in that business if the proposed change is passed. In lashing out at what he mockingly referred to as news organizations, Martz stated he'd always been opposed to the expanded scope of the project, which claimed that nobody'd bothered to contact him about the facts of his 30-plus years of community involvement. Which brings us to another point in this story, and that's the town's refusal to release the contact information for those serving on the committee. As reported yesterday, town officials have refused to release that information to Girard at Large, claiming it would be an invasion of the committee members' privacy. We'll post that legal opinion as well as Martz's more than interesting letter with this newscast at GirardAtLarge.com, and you can bet there's more to say on this story during this show this morning, because I was there last night, live from Pinardville.
That's right. Here's Richard.
Good morning, Manchester, and to those of you in surrounding towns, welcome to Hour 2 of Girard at Large. I am your loving it in Pinardville host, Richard Girard. Thanks for tuning in. Well, first of all, let me talk about this meeting last night at Planned Pinardhood. John Heichel, the chairman of the planning board, who's been on the show on more than a couple of occasions now as a result of Planned Pinardville, basically said in one of the interviews, both of the interviews that I can think of off the top of my head, that, look, outside of something that's narrowly focused on the commercial industrial corridor, I don't see where this thing's going to see the light of day at the planning board. And so what he did last night was he came into the meeting with and we'll scan it and post it, with a sheet. And his motion was to replace a paragraph on page 20 and include the following things. Commercial and economic development in Pinardville needs to be encouraged and supported in a manner which does not have an adverse impact on Pinardville's residential neighborhoods. Any zoning amendments proposed or adopted in reliance on this plan should be limited in scope and reach to the Mast Road corridor from the Manchester line to Route 114, and the west side of Daniel Plummer Road corridor from Mast Road to the Bedford line, and in each of those parcels with approximately 150 feet of the central line of said roads, so-called focus area. Residential neighborhoods abutting the focus area should not be disturbed or rezoned as a result of the plan. No use of the town's power of eminent domain should be used for private benefit or gain as a result of this plan. Illustrations and maps in the plan, including those showing possible new streets or additional buildings, are not intended to approve or support construction of those items, all of which should be undertaken only at the request of affected parcel owners and in the manner consistent with town zoning as now or hereafter adopted. The abundance of affordable housing in Pinardville needs to be supported and preserved, while other areas of Goffstown are examined to encourage similar contributions to affordable housing stock. So the chairman of the planning board spoke last night as probably a man they think they're going to need to deal with when it gets to the planning board. And despite the request of the planner, Brian Rose, who we have again extended an invitation to be on the show, to whom we've extended an invitation to be on the show, who said, can we at least talk about the changes before we eliminate one of the two options? And the board unanimously said no, which had to be annoying for him. But it was an interesting meeting, and that basically, if I can put it this way, took over the agenda. And that was the discussion. They did talk to the consultant. The consultant walked through the report. He gave some terms, and I'm not going to necessarily rehash it all. If you want to see what happened as it happened, you can get to girardatlarge.com and go to live blogs under the Oh My Blog navigation bar. And you will see it there, posted in its entirety. As best I could keep up with what was happening, I was writing what was happening. Now, in that meeting, I noticed a fellow named Tony Martz. He is a man that has been brought to my attention for multiple reasons by multiple people as this Planned Pinardhood thing has blown up. And he doesn't really at all like the term Planned Pinardhood. And despite the fact that he had the opportunity to introduce himself to me last night, which I figured he would after this letter, he did not, and that's fine. But clearly the coverage of what's going on and the questions being raised. I want to clear, I don't know this man, so I've got no reason to target him. But I have raised questions of people who I've been presented with information that shows that they may have a conflict of interest. For example, we're talking about mixed-use zoning. Well, what could that look like? Take a look out here in Pinardville already, where you've got the overgrown park by the Rite Aid and the low-income housing that Greater Manchester NeighborWorks built behind that parking lot. That was all part of a mixed-use development. So if you want to know what some of the people who envision Pinardville see it as in the future, think of that. It's got your little public green space. It's got your low-income housing, multi-unit townhouses all lined up in a row, and it's got a drugstore. This is what they envision. Well, our information is that Mr. Martz was representing the developer who did that. That's fine. That's his business. Our information is also that didn't necessarily go through the process that was approved by the planning board, that the commercial stuff was supposed to be done first, and then the residential stuff. And the residential stuff had conditions, which they went back and apparently got a lot of changes after the fact made after the approvals. And it upset a lot of people, and they're worried that this is the kind of mixed-use development that they're going to see in Pinardville, where irrespective of the rules and constraints, that powerful people with connections are going to be able to get them overturned in the favor of the developers, leaving the town with what it now has with Rite Aid, that park, which half of it looks like it's just, tall weeds, to be honest with you, in that multi-unit low-income housing behind that. That's not their vision of Pinardville. And personally, I don't see how that's economic development. Now, in his letter, Martz, I'm going to read it to you. We're going to post it. My wife, Tess, and I have lived in Goffstown since returning to New Hampshire from college and law school in 1982. In the 33 years we've lived here, we have volunteered or been elected to over 25 boards, committees, and civic organizations. In those 33 years, our motivations for community service have never been questioned. Contrary to what's been said or implied relative to my interest in and motivations for supporting and serving on the Planned Pinardville Committee, I do not make my living in Goffstown. In the 33 years I have lived here, I have likely represented close to 6 clients or projects before Goffstown boards and committees, not much of a local law practice. Well, I do know that he represented Dunkin' Donuts out on Hanover Street, the old it wasn't Anton's. What was the restaurant there by the school? The one that burned down, had the great marinara sauce.
Angelo's.
Thank you, Steve. Angelo's.
Yeah, Angelo's. It was T.R. Brennan's when it burned down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And right. that sauce was fantastic.
Yes. So I know when I know he did represent the developer there before the Manchester zoning board on their sign. So what his law practice is, I don't know, but I think he should come forward with the projects that he has represented in Goffstown. Anyway, we're doing research on that. Believe me when I tell you, we've had people send us information, lots of it. So much to sort through. Anyway, any person holding themselves out as a news organization would likely know these facts if they had paid attention to what goes on in Goffstown or bothered to call me to ask. That has not happened. You're right, Mr. Martz. It's not for lack of trying on our part, though, when the town that you are serving refuses to release your contact information and expects that I'm going to go around. Could I dig around for it? Probably could, but I'm making a broader point, which I'll discuss later, on the availability of public information or information to the public in situations like this. Anyway, there certainly is a consensus that Planned Pinardville process has not been well run. The initial idea for Planned Pinardville was to study the Mass Road Commercial Corridor as an opportunity to determine whether or not more community-focused zoning could encourage economic development without harming the residential neighborhoods. In Pinardville, I was a supporter of John Heichel's petition zoning article last year, seeking to rezone all of Mass Road Corridor commercial since there was no study done, blah, blah, blah. Pinardville residents are rightly concerned that the Pinard-Planville process veered off the Mass Road corridor into their neighborhoods. This was neither the initial intent of the project nor development that I ever supported. In fact, I've worked very hard from the inception of this idea to prevent that from happening. Local control of the entire process was lost somewhere along the line, and of course, they don't know along what line. Still, he writes, local concerns are being inflamed by some pretty outrageous accusations and claims. I can withstand the accusation of being labeled some kind of zoning profiteer, but frankly, to liken Planned Pinardville with the boogeymen of UN Agenda 21, Planned Parenthood, 10th Amendment secession, and rampant eminent domain is far more outrageous. Whether raised by the ill-informed or the malicious, these issues divert the community's attention from an interest in examining our own needs and opportunities. By the way, I started my community service on the Maple Avenue Playground Committee in 1984. For those who are starting their service on the Stop Planned Pinardville Committee, welcome to Goffstown. Now, I find this really interesting. Apparently, Planned Parenthood and Planned Pinardville, Planned Pinardhood, resonate. But here's the thing. I often wonder about people who are indignant over questions that get raised about their participation in anything. Now, I could go into Agenda 21, and if you understand what Agenda 21 is and how it works and what's happening here, you have to ask yourself, why is everything on the focus? And they talked about this, the consultants talked about this last night. Their primary objectives were to create character and walkability. Well, if you read any of the Agenda 21 documents, you go right to the UN's website and get it. What do they talk about? They talk about those things. And if you read the statement of why should it be an objective to create a community that is multicultural, multiracial, multi-social economic demographic with opportunities for anyone in any housing category. Oh, and by the way, everyone should live within 5 minutes of anything that they would need or want to do. And I mean 5-minute walk. And you take a look at some of these zoning provisions, you have to ask yourself, what are they doing? But that aside, you know, when they go around the table at the beginning of each meeting and they introduce themselves for the public, you know, there are people there who partially introduce themselves. Oh, I'm so-and-so, I'm a resident representative. I'm so-and-so, I'm the Board of Selectmen's representative. I'm so-and-so, I'm the Planning Board's representative. Well, we get to Tony Martz. He just says, I'm Tony Martz. Now, maybe everybody in town knows who he is and what he represents. I don't know. And then there are fellows like Andy Carteret, who I don't know, but he never introduces himself as somebody who works for New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. Now, maybe that's not why he's not there, but don't you think he should, given that the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority is the one that gave the grant? And don't you think that people should question why the grant came from $1 million grant that the Housing Finance Authority got from the Office of Sustainable Development of the Federal Housing and Urban Development Grant? If people get their skirt in a bunch over questions being asked about who they are so that they can understand the interests they represent. And if people get offended that questions are being raised, and if town officials are refusing under the guise of it invades their privacy to allow people to know who these folks are, to independently verify where they live, that they're qualified, to be able to talk to them and ask them questions about their point of view, if that's an invasion of privacy, then what the hell are people in public office for? This doesn't make a lick of sense. And so on one hand, I got a town saying, oh, I can't give you that information. It's invasion of privacy. Again, another guy complaining that he's not being contacted. Maybe you two guys should get together and compare notes so that when guys like me make phone calls to try to get information so I can talk to guys like Martz, we don't end up with a Mexican firing squad.
This is Girard at Large.